I thought marrying into Daniel's family would secure a future built on love and respect. But on the night I lost access to our joint accounts, frozen without warning, I realized their smiles had always been masks. My mother-in-law's laughter echoed in my head, sharp as glass, when she said, "Now we'll see how long you last without his money." I felt stripped bare, powerless. What they didn't know was that beneath the silence, I carried a weapon they couldn't predict, one that would turn their mockery into disbelief and their empire into ashes. When I married Daniel, the world looked at me as if I had won the lottery. He was the golden heir to a media empire, polished and charming, the kind of man who never walked into a room. He owned it. Our wedding was broadcast across glossy magazines, champagne flowing under crystal chandeliers, every photo curated to scream perfection. To the outside world, I was the fairy tale bride who had stepped into royalty. But beneath the glitter, I felt the weight of eyes watching me like a hawk, measuring whether I belonged. Margaret, my mother-in-law, never raised her voice, but her smile had teeth. That night, while photographers begged us to kiss for the 50th time, I caught her glance across the ballroom. Cold, calculated. She clinked her glass and whispered to a guest beside her, and though I couldn't hear the words, I knew they were about me. Her approval was a currency, and I hadn't earned a single cent. The cracks showed quickly, even when Daniel still laced his fingers through mine and whispered that I was safe. When we moved into the family estate, I found a set of keys laid out on the counter, engraved with the names of everyone in the household, except mine. At first, I laughed it off, convincing myself it was a mistake, but as days passed, the house never truly opened to me. Photos on the walls captured decades of family history, yet when our wedding portrait was framed, it was hung in a corner by the staircase, barely visible. The message was clear. I was present but never included. Daniel brushed it aside with his easy charm. "Don't overthink it, Em. They just need time." I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love would be enough to bridge the distance. But then came the moment that cut deeper than words ever could. I was at a florist downtown, reaching for a bouquet of lilies for our dining room table, when my card was declined. I tried again, declined. Embarrassed, I called the bank, only to be told my access had been frozen. Joint accounts, savings, all locked without explanation. My cheeks burned as the florist handed back the flowers, her polite smile laced with pity. I walked out empty-handed, shaking, my chest hollow. That evening, I confronted Daniel. He sighed, not angry, just weary, as if I were a child asking for too much candy. "Emily, you know how my mother feels about finances. It's temporary. Cutting you off keeps the peace. She doesn't want you tied into things you can't manage." I stared at him, numb. "So you decided this without telling me?" His jaw tightened. "It's not about you. It's about keeping balance in the family. Please just understand." Understand. The word echoed like a slap. I was expected to be quiet, to smile, to play the role of ornamental wife while decisions were made above my head. My presence in their world was decorative at best, disposable at worst. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's disdain grew bolder. At family dinners, she would lift her glass and toast, "To blood that carries on the legacy," her gaze sliding over me like I was air. When she finally spoke directly, her words cut like knives disguised in velvet. "You're a shadow, Emily, not blood. Shadows don't inherit, they fade." The table erupted in polite laughter, and even Daniel lowered his head, silent. I felt something inside me break that night. Not tears, not anger, something colder. A recognition that I was living in a house where I would never be more than an outsider, where love was conditional and loyalty a commodity. Then one night, as I searched Daniel's study for a document I thought I had misplaced, I stumbled upon a folder tucked deep inside a drawer. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was, a prenuptial agreement I had never seen before, signed and notarized months before the wedding. Buried in the legal language was the truth. I had no rights to his wealth, no claim to property, no financial foothold whatsoever. If the marriage ended, I would walk away with nothing. The room spun around me as the ink blurred. Betrayal had been written into the story long before I walked down the aisle, and now, standing there with the paper in my hands, I realized the game had never been about love. It was about power, and I was already losing. I played my part well. To Margaret's eyes, I was the defeated wife who accepted her dominion. I let her dictate the weekly budget, even stood silently as she handed me envelopes with approved cash for groceries. When she sneered about how a woman who couldn't even balance a household account should never touch millions, I lowered my eyes and nodded. To Daniel, I appeared weary but compliant, too fragile to fight back. The truth was their contempt had given me the perfect disguise. Every insult, every humiliating toast, every backhanded remark, I documented it. I began keeping a hidden journal, pages filled with dates, times, verbatim quotes. At dinners, when Margaret let her cruelty slip under the guise of jokes, I smiled faintly while my recorder tucked inside my clutch captured every word. I knew one day their arrogance could be turned into evidence. What they didn't know was that before Daniel, I had been someone else entirely. My name once appeared in trade journals, my face recognized in boardrooms. I had been a rising star in mergers and acquisitions, closing deals in Silicon Valley before I was 30. I had walked away from that world for love, or what I thought was love. I buried that identity the moment I said I do. But now, as my marriage tightened around me like a noose, that buried self stirred again. Late one night, scrolling through old emails, I stumbled upon a message from an old mentor. Subject line: "Are you watching this?" The attachment was a prospectus. The startup AI firm I had once seeded during its infancy was on the verge of an IPO. My minor stake, left forgotten for years, had grown into something extraordinary. The numbers on the page made my pulse quicken. If the IPO launched successfully, my silence would transform into a war chest. From that moment, I no longer felt powerless. I felt the first flicker of fire. I moved carefully. Old contacts were reawakened under the guise of casual meetings. Over coffee, I met with a CEO who had been pushed out of his company by Daniel's family's ruthless acquisitions. He still nursed the bitterness, and when I suggested an alliance, his eyes lit with recognition. He remembered me not as Daniel's wife, but as the negotiator who once outmaneuvered him. We shook hands with the understanding that the enemy of my enemy could become my ally. Next came the loyalists, assistants, accountants, employees discarded by the family empire. They carried stories, whispers, documents that painted a portrait of corruption and manipulation behind the family's polished image. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. But I didn't just gather allies in person. Online, I crafted a new mask, a faceless persona on finance forums and social media, posting razor-sharp analyses of market moves, hinting at scandals within the media empire. My words spread, shared by traders and investors who speculated wildly. Each post was a stone cast into their fortress, creating ripples of unease. I relished the chaos. It meant they no longer controlled the narrative. Still, I remained cautious. I hid my tracks, encrypted my devices, shifted between coffee shops to use Wi-Fi that couldn't be traced. The thrill of my double life gave me strength, yet I knew one mistake could expose me. At night, lying beside Daniel's sleeping frame, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long before suspicion cracked his mask of indifference. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous the game became. I realized that power wasn't just about money. It was about information. Financial records, recordings, leaked memos, online whispers. I was building an arsenal invisible to them. And with every weapon collected, I felt less like a shadow and more like a storm, gathering just beyond their horizon. One evening, after leaving a discreet meeting with a potential investor, I returned to my car and found an envelope tucked under the wiper blade. No address, no name, just a single typed line on the paper inside. Someone is watching every move you make. The words chilled me. For the first time, I understood that in playing this game, I had not only awakened my old self, I had also drawn the attention of an enemy I could not yet see. The first strike had to be subtle, disguised as coincidence. I began feeding carefully chosen documents to a journalist I trusted. Evidence of inflated revenues, falsified contracts, and offshore accounts hidden under layers of shell corporations. These were whispers turned into proof, the kind that couldn't be dismissed as rumor. Within weeks, stories began to surface in niche financial blogs, then gained traction in mainstream outlets. Headlines questioned the integrity of the very empire Margaret worshipped. I watched from the shadows as the walls began to crack. At gala dinners, investors whispered behind raised glasses. At board meetings, Margaret's polished speeches were punctured by questions she could not answer. Her smile, once unshakable, began to falter. Every article that exposed another lie was a nail driven into the coffin of her credibility. I never appeared in the stories, but my fingerprints were everywhere. There was a dark thrill in it. Watching the mighty stumble, knowing I had set the fall in motion, it was intoxicating. And yet, as I read the comment sections and the endless speculation, I felt the weight of complicity. I wasn't merely a victim anymore. I was the puppeteer, pulling strings in secret, manipulating not just my family, but the public that devoured scandal like blood. Still, I told myself it was justice. They had tried to erase me, and now I was erasing them. Then came the twist I hadn't planned for. One morning, as I sipped coffee and scrolled through headlines, a new story appeared. Not about Margaret, not about Daniel, but about me. A tabloid accused me of masterminding financial fraud, claiming I had orchestrated the leaks to cover my own embezzlement. They framed me not as a whistleblower, but as a manipulator desperate for relevance. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. Within hours, hashtags erupted across Twitter, were Gold Digger Emily, Empire Scam, She Played Strangers dissected my past, questioning every decision, every photo, every public appearance. The narrative shifted like a riptide, and suddenly I wasn't the silent avenger. I was the spectacle. I tried to stay calm, to remind myself that storms pass, but the storm only grew. News anchors dissected my suspicious background. Pundits speculated that I had married Daniel for access to insider information. Every sacrifice I had made, every humiliation I had endured, was twisted into evidence of greed. Then came the betrayal that cut deeper than headlines. Sarah, my cousin-in-law, the one who had always seemed to sympathize, appeared on a talk show. She painted me as manipulative, claiming I had confided my plans to her in late-night conversations. Her tears fell on cue, the perfect performance. Watching her, I realized she had been feeding information to the press all along, sharpening the knife for the moment she could plunge it into my back. When I confronted Daniel, hoping for even a shred of defense, his response was colder than anything his mother had ever said. He looked at me, eyes flat, and said, "Emily, I never really trusted you. This just proves I was right." The words hollowed me out. All the years I had given him, all the love I had wrapped around his name, reduced to suspicion and dismissal. In that moment, I understood that I had been alone from the beginning. The board meeting was the final blow. I walked into the glass-walled room, determination still burning in me, only to be handed the resolution, my removal from the subsidiary company where I had quietly tried to build influence. The vote was unanimous. No one spoke to me directly. No one met my eyes. It was as if I had already been erased. I left the building under flashing cameras, my face plastered across screens as the villain of a story I hadn't written. The fire that had fueled me flickered low, replaced by a cold void. For the first time, I wondered if I had lost not just the game, but myself. The silence after my fall was suffocating, but silence can be fertile ground. In the weeks following my public disgrace, I disappeared. To the world, I looked defeated, a woman crushed under the weight of scandal. Behind the curtain, I worked relentlessly. While the media painted me as a fraud, I finalized a plan years in the making, one that had been dormant until now. When the announcement came, it hit like thunder. At a crowded press conference flanked by executives in sharp suits, I stepped up to the podium and revealed the deal that would rewrite the narrative. A $50 million merger between the AI startup I had invested in years ago and a global investment firm eager to back my vision. The room erupted. Overnight, I wasn't a disgraced wife. I was the architect of one of the most significant deals of the decade. Headlines flipped as if someone had switched the current. The same media outlets that once called me a parasite now declared me the Phoenix of Wall Street. Commentators marveled at how I had pulled off a deal of such magnitude while living in the shadow of a hostile family. Investors, once wary, scrambled to align with me. The hashtags that had vilified me turned ironic. Suar Gold Digger Emily trended again, but now as a badge of defiance, worn by women who admired the way I had turned mockery into empire. But I wasn't finished. At the peak of the media frenzy, I released a recording. Margaret's voice, unmistakable, plotting with board members to manipulate stock prices and defraud shareholders. The recording spread like wildfire, played on every news station, analyzed by pundits until the words were burned into public consciousness. The matriarch who once mocked me as a shadow was now exposed under the brightest lights. Within days, federal investigators opened inquiries into the family empire. Stock prices plummeted, board members resigned, and Margaret's polished image crumbled. For a moment, I allowed myself to savor it. The empire that had dismissed me as irrelevant was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption, and I was the one holding the match. But then came the moment I had dreaded. Daniel, standing beside his mother as cameras flashed, spoke words I couldn't unhear. "My mother has been my compass all my life. I will stand by her no matter what." His voice was firm, unwavering, and final. That was his last betrayal, not with papers or silence, but with allegiance. He chose blood over love, and in that moment, I understood there was nothing left to salvage. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Even after everything, some part of me had hoped Daniel might see me for who I truly was. That hope died on the steps of the courthouse, and with it, the last thread tying me to the life I had built around him. Still, I pressed forward. Margaret's empire unraveled in real time. Shareholders dumped their stocks, allies distanced themselves, and the once invincible family name became synonymous with scandal. The mansion that once loomed over me now stood as a monument to arrogance, its halls filled not with power, but with fear. Forbes called me the woman who outsmarted an empire and plastered my face on the cover. The photograph showed me in a tailored black suit, eyes unflinching, framed by the headline. Strangers stopped me on the street, whispering words like inspiration and survivor. I had become a symbol, a living rebuke to every woman told she was nothing without the men who held the keys. And yet, victory tasted hollow. In quiet moments, I thought of the life I had once imagined with Daniel, the children we had planned, the trust I had given him without hesitation. All of it was gone, replaced by headlines, lawsuits, and a name that now belonged more to the public than to me. I had won the war, but love had not survived the battlefield. One night, as I sat in my office surrounded by congratulatory messages, a new email slipped into my inbox. No sender, no subject, just a line of text that froze me in place. Your in-laws were never the true enemy. They were puppets. The hand pulling the strings has yet to reveal itself. My pulse quickened. I had thought the game was over, that I had crushed the empire that tried to erase me, but the message was clear. The war had only just begun. Victory was never as simple as the headlines made it. In the weeks after Margaret's empire collapsed, I became a fixture in every financial publication. "Phoenix rises from ashes," one cover declared. Another called me the woman who burned the old world to build a new one. Yet beneath the applause was a sharper edge. Critics called me ruthless, cold, calculating. They compared me to the very woman I had fought to bring down. It began with whispers in editorials. "Emily has mastered the art of survival, but at what cost?" Then came the talk shows, hosts dissecting my expressions, debating whether my victories were built on brilliance or pure manipulation. The narrative shifted again, this time painting me less as a heroine and more as a woman too sharp, too dangerous to be admired without fear. "The rebirth of steel," one commentator called me. It was meant as praise, but it felt like a chain around my neck. The weight grew heavier when tragedy struck within my own walls. A young analyst I had hired early on, Jacob, barely 25, had been one of the few people who saw me not as a headline, but as a leader worth believing in. He worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night, eager to prove himself. One morning, he didn't show up. By noon, I learned the news. He had taken his own life. The note left behind mentioned the unbearable pressure, the scrutiny, the online attacks directed at anyone associated with me. I stared at his handwriting, my chest hollow. He had been collateral damage in my war, and unlike the faceless names who had profited from corruption, Jacob had been innocent. His death carved into me the question I had avoided for too long. Had I become what I despised? Margaret had destroyed lives under the guise of legacy. Was I now doing the same under the guise of justice? The thought haunted me. Nights blurred into dawn as I replayed every decision, every headline, every choice that had led us here. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the woman Daniel married, nor the victim his family mocked. I saw a face hardened by battles, eyes sharp as glass, a figure the world now feared as much as it admired. The irony was brutal. I had spent years trying to escape Margaret's shadow, only to step into it. I barely had time to grieve before the next blow landed. A subpoena arrived, neatly sealed, announcing a federal investigation, not into Margaret's empire, but into mine. Allegations of insider trading, market manipulation, and fraud filled the pages. Though I knew the accusations were exaggerated, possibly fabricated, the implications were devastating. If proven true, everything I had built could collapse overnight. As I read the document, a chill spread through me. This wasn't coincidence, it was a counterstrike. The pieces began to align when whispers reached me of a name I hadn't heard in years. Black Raven. The hedge fund was infamous in financial circles, a shadow player that thrived on chaos, pulling strings from behind curtains, deals that collapsed overnight, markets that swung without logic, rumors always traced back to them. Now I understood the anonymous warning I had received. Black Raven hadn't just been watching. They had been orchestrating. Margaret's empire, Daniel's betrayal, the leaks, the smear campaigns. None of it was random. It was all part of a larger board game, and I had been moving exactly as they intended. The realization deepened when my own confidant turned. Marcus, my longtime financial advisor, the man who had helped me manage the AI investment and navigate the IPO, came into my office one evening with a look that wasn't quite guilt, wasn't quite defiance, just inevitability. "You should know," he said quietly. "I've been working with them." The words didn't register at first. My pulse pounded in my ears. With who? Black Raven. I wanted to scream, to strike him, but I only whispered, "Why?" "Because no one beats them, Emily. Not me, not you, not anyone. They don't lose. And if you think you've won, it's only because they allowed it. You're not their rival. You're their pawn." The betrayal cut deeper than Daniels ever had. Marcus wasn't family, but he had been the one man I thought I could trust in this arena. And now he was telling me that every move I'd made, every victory I had claimed, was nothing more than choreography in someone else's dance. I dismissed him with trembling hands, my voice barely steady. But after he left, I collapsed into my chair, staring at the city lights outside my window. All this time, I had believed I was the puppeteer. Now I understood I was still a string, pulled by unseen fingers. The next day, I received another message. This time it came from someone I still believed in, Claire, my last remaining ally, the woman who had stood by me through the IPO and the chaos that followed. The text was short, urgent, and final. Be careful. They're moving against you. They don't just want your company, they want you erased. The words seared into me. Black Raven wasn't just a faceless enemy. They were preparing to end me. I folded the phone into my palm and exhaled slowly. For years, I had fought shadows. Margaret, Daniel, the media, the public. But this was different. This was a war against something vast, invisible, and merciless. And I was standing at the edge of it, stripped of trust, stripped of certainty, with only one question left burning in my mind. How do you fight an enemy that owns the game itself? The night I received Claire's warning, I sat in silence long after the city had gone to sleep. The lights of skyscrapers flickered like chess pieces across the skyline, each one a reminder of a game I no longer wanted to play. For years, I had fought to prove I belonged, to outwit those who had underestimated me, to survive their betrayals. But the truth was finally clear. There was no winning in a system designed by men like those in Black Raven. The board was rigged, the rules fixed, the outcome preordained. I remembered Marcus's words. You're not their rival, you're their pawn. They haunted me. But what if I stopped playing? What if the only way to win was to step off the board entirely? The decision came slowly, like dawn breaking over a horizon I hadn't seen in years. I began dismantling the empire I had built with my own hands. I sold controlling stakes in the AI company, liquidated assets, and withdrew from the battles that had consumed me. Advisors screamed that I was insane, that I was walking away from billions. Perhaps I was, but I was also reclaiming something far more valuable: my freedom. When the press caught wind of it, speculation erupted. Had I been threatened? Was I guilty? Was I folding under pressure? I knew they expected me to retreat into silence, but instead I chose the opposite. Standing before a wall of cameras, microphones thrust toward me, I declared what no one expected to hear. I don't play chess, I said, my voice steady, echoing into every living room. I write new rules. The words spread faster than any scandal ever had. For once, I wasn't defending myself against lies or accusations. I was proclaiming a truth. That declaration became the cliff's edge, the moment when I broke from the cycle that had chained me. Of course, the backlash came. Analysts accused me of destabilizing markets. Rivals mocked me as reckless, and former allies distanced themselves. But for the first time, I didn't care. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. I wasn't even fighting them. I was simply refusing to play their game. In the vacuum left by my retreat from traditional power, something unexpected began to grow. Calls poured in, not from hedge funds or media barons, but from women, entrepreneurs, founders, dreamers who had been silenced or suffocated by the very system I had defied. They didn't want me as their queen. They wanted me as their architect. And so the Phoenix Protocol was born. It began as an idea scratched on the back of a notepad, a fund, not to compete with the titans of Wall Street, but to build something new. Instead of hoarding power, it would redistribute it. Instead of silencing voices, it would amplify them. Phoenix Protocol became a sanctuary for women whose innovations had been dismissed, whose ideas had been stolen, whose futures had been traded away in boardrooms run by men in tailored suits. Launching it was like setting fire to the old world. Black Raven and its ilk tried to discredit me, whispering that the fund was a vanity project. But as stories spread of women whose companies flourished under Phoenix Protocol's backing, the whispers grew fainter. A biotech founder who had been denied funding by every major VC closed her first round through us. A single mother with a fintech app saw her product scale globally. Each success wasn't just a victory, it was proof that there was another way to play. As months turned into years, I transformed in the eyes of the world. I was no longer just Emily, the disgraced wife or the ruthless avenger. I became something else, the architect of a new order, the woman who had walked into the fire and emerged with wings. Still, in the quiet moments, I couldn't help but reflect. I thought of Jacob, the young analyst whose life had been cut short, and I built a scholarship in his name for students entering finance with dreams of change. I thought of Daniel, whose silence had been the sharpest knife, and though bitterness lingered, I wished him peace. Even Margaret, who had once laughed at my insignificance, haunted my thoughts, not as an enemy, but as a warning of what unchecked ambition could make of a human soul. My legacy was not in the billions I could have hoarded, but in the lives I touched, the women who rose where I once fell, the communities that thrived because I chose to step aside rather than dominate. For the first time in years, I felt light. On a spring morning, I stood on the balcony of my office as the city stretched before me. The hum of traffic was steady, the rhythm of life unchanged by the wars I had fought. Somewhere below, people rushed to meetings, children laughed on their way to school, and investors checked their phones for the next big swing. The world spun on, indifferent and alive. I smiled. Not the brittle smile of survival, but the quiet one of release. My in-laws could still laugh in their bitterness. Tabloids could still invent stories, and Black Raven could continue to pull its strings. None of it mattered anymore, because I was no longer a pawn nor a queen. I was the woman who had walked away from the board entirely, leaving behind not ashes, but a blueprint. And as the sun climbed higher, I knew with absolute certainty that my rebirth was complete.